Hey everyone, this is Ken Klippenstein with Breaking Point's The Intercept edition. I'm joined today by Khalid Aljabri, an expert on Saudi Arabia. He has been spitting truth on this subject for a number of years now. Realities that you don't often hear from the Washington media that in reality is awash in Saudi money and Saudi influence. This guy doesn't care about any of that. He tells you how it is. And the reason he knows so much, in part, is because he is himself from Saudi Arabia. His father is the former intelligence chief, and he's a medical doctor by trade. I think that's part of why he's able to be so candid about these things. He doesn't depend on the think tank circuit for money. But I'm having him here today to talk about the nature of the U.S.-Saudi relationship. If you guys can play a video right now of a Saudi prince that I caught wind of the other day, I think it'll give you a sense of where the relationship is at right now.
Anybody that challenges the existence of this country and this kingdom, all of us, we are projects of jihad and martyrdom. That's my message to anybody that thinks that he can threaten us.
All right, Khalid, thanks for joining us. Can you explain to everyone, who was that in the video we just saw? What is the significance of what he said?
So thanks for having me. Just the fact, he is a prince in terms of being a leader of a tribe that historically ruled the northwestern part of Saudi Arabia before the founding King Abdulaziz founded the kingdom. So he's not in line for the throne, but he is related by blood and marriage to the current ruling family. But that's beside the point. For him to have the audacity to issue these threats in the context of a police state in Saudi Arabia where people are being locked up for mild tweets is indicative and symptomatic of the rock bottom that the U.S.-Saudi relationship has hit. For him to say that, it means only two things. Either he felt comfortable saying it and feared no repercussions or reprisals, or there might have been an element of endorsement for that kind of messaging that, honestly, as I scroll through Saudi social media, is kind of consistent top down.
Yeah, that's a really important context to understand. This isn't like in the United States where it's just some guy, is on the freeway filming himself in his car doing some tirade about, whatever it is. This is a totalitarian regime that not only has punished people very harshly for speech, but is doing so right now. And just yesterday, there was a case of a U.S. citizen from Florida who I believe was detained in a Saudi airport when he went back to Saudi Arabia. He's a dual citizen visiting his family. Can you talk about that a little bit and what that says about what we were just talking about?
Yeah, so Saad al-Madhi, he's a 72-year-old American Saudi who lives in Florida, and he returned to the kingdom in November 2021. And only on October 3rd, so a couple of weeks ago, was sentenced to 16 years in prison for tweeting. And I went through his Twitter account yesterday. There were mild tweets. I really don't know why he was sentenced. There are some mild critique of the Yemen war, which would have been interpreted as basically going against the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. But what's really troubling is the timing of that sentences. And basically, they're happening after the Biden MBS fist bump, which tells us that that trip failed, and MBS, after receiving Biden in Jeddah, is totally unhinged.
Something I'm hearing from a lot of people in the human rights community is that after that meeting, there was a sea change in terms of how Mohammed bin Salman and the Saudi government treated not just dissidents, but even, again, Americans in prison, essentially hostage situations, and that there was a shift towards him acting as though the sense is that he's getting a green light from Washington to go ahead and do these things. Is that the impression that you've gotten as well?
Yeah, and this is supported by facts. So, I think President Biden was right to acknowledge the presence of Saudi American hostages in his op-ed before the trip. He promised and pledged to free them and remove the remaining restrictions on their travel and to bring them home to the United States. But since that trip, MBS has taken more American hostages, and it's not working. And if you were MBS sitting in a room right now, and despite all your misbehaviors, you're not receiving any consequences, you're basically being rewarded with the prestige of a presidential visit by President Biden and fist bumps, you have zero incentives to change your behavior. If anything, that reinforces your bad behavior.
And so maybe that's how we get to a situation where we have a Saudi prince saying that we are projects of jihad in English, which is a very interesting choice.
And French.
Yeah. That you would choose to say this in these Western languages. What is the significance of that? Because again, you're saying to be clear, he's not an official he's not in line of succession. That said, he is a grandson of the founding king. He's a cousin of Mohammed bin Salman, the de facto ruler right now.
Yeah.
So what does that say about where we're at with this country that, as you said before, Biden said, we're going to meet with them. I'm going to, and that's very valuable to somebody like MBS who's still trying to shore up his authority. He's not yet king, to have the American president meet with you. What does that say about what that meeting accomplished?
It basically failed on blood, with an accelerated repression campaign by MBS, including against more American citizens, and it failed on oil with what we just saw recently. I think one of the reasoning and rationale behind that visit is to try and relieve Americans at the gas pump on the short term, and the long term to try and squeeze Putin and Russia. And I think both objectives fail miserably. And again, there's a lot of debate before the visit. Well, does realism prevail over values? And I think it failed on both. And you see this term in DC, and I studied international relations as well. But realpolitik is not just a term thrown around to justify an amoral foreign policy, especially in the absence of any real wins. And I think now we have a lot of people thought that the trip was not going to be successful. I actually wrote an op-ed despite the plight that me and my family are facing, and I urged Biden to fix the relationship.
Yeah, please talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so a lot of I'd like to create a clear differentiation between the insulated ruling family and the Saudi public. I speak for myself, for a lot of Saudi exiles, and for a lot of Saudis inside Saudi Arabia. We are proponents of a healthy U.S.-Saudi relationship, and this is why I urge President Biden to fix it, because as the adult in the room, you can't abdicate the future of the U.S.-Saudi relationship to a vindictive, volatile psychopath. It's only gonna, go downhill from there. And I urge President Biden to fix the relationship, albeit with conditions and demands of Saudi reciprocity. And that didn't happen. Unfortunately, the trip was lopsided. It was one-way concessions, and that only emboldened MBS to pursue more domestic and transnational oppression, but also reckless foreign policy. And you can argue that President Biden's policy towards Saudi Arabia has undermined his policy in Ukraine and his policy to kind of curb inflation at home as well.
Yeah. So the interesting thing about Khalid is, unlike a lot of folks in Washington, he's a pretty humble guy, and so he doesn't always talk about the kind of extensive education and training that he's had in international relations. So having that background, what can you tell us about the shift by Saudi Arabia towards a closer relationship with the Russians, how that relates to MBS, and what do you think the Biden administration can do about that?
Yeah, so I remember back in March, I had the pleasure of co-authoring a piece in one of the magazines in foreign policy. And basically, the whole theme was Biden should be tough on MBS for siding with Russia. And yes, this is not written in a contract, but historically, the arrangement between Saudi Arabia and the United States was the U.S. would protect Saudi Arabia, including oil facilities, and in return, Saudi Arabia would manipulate its oil policy to be aligned with U.S. interests. And that has lasted more than seven decades right now. And I think right now, MBS no longer believes that the U.S. is actually, protecting Saudi Arabia, which is not true. But that's understood on his part. And this is why he stopped, basically paying his end of the bargain. And it's really, for Saudi Arabia, the threat, this is one of the kind of outdated, expired arguments in DC that no longer holds any water, which is we need to be nice to Saudi Arabia so they don't go to Russia and China. Well, guess what? Nobody on his sane mind would be betting on Russia today. I mean,
which can't handle a small government on its border that they've poured all of these resources and probably decades of intelligence that they've been developing in the run-up to.
Absolutely, and there are multiple reasons, and we'll take them simply. So first of all, it takes time and money to change your military that is dependent on U.S.
That's such an important point.
Yeah.
You talk to military officers, what they tell you, they give you a much different picture than the arguments, than the excuses, frankly, that you hear in Washington about why we need to tolerate what MBS is doing. Oh, we might switch to the Russians. Oh, we might switch to the Chinese. Talk to any military officer. They say that's a decades-long project. And then you end up getting worse weapon systems because the Americans have far superior ones.
Absolutely. But imagine this. I'm just going to try to simplify it. So Saudi Arabia's grievances with the Biden administration and honestly even Trump and Obama is that you're not doing enough to protect us from Iran. So let's establish one thing. Saudi Arabia is afraid of Iran, and Iran is a very bad actor in that region. So because you're not confident in U.S. protection against Iran, you want to pivot to two countries, Russia and China, that are actively in bed with Iran I mean, that's pretzel logic. Like, I tried to do so many mental somersaults and I can't even get it. And actually right now, like, imagine Saudi pivoting to Russia to protect it from Iran, while Iran is supplying Russia with like drones for their hostile attacks on Ukraine. It's just a bluff and it needs to be called.
It's a bluff, yeah.
I mean, in some sense, it's not leverage that should be considered by the Saudis. I think MBS is now has a track record of pursuing dumb policies that would boomerang to the kingdom. So like, yeah, he would probably pursue Chinese and Russian weapons, but that's not going to be for his benefit or for Saudi Arabia's benefit. I mean, it's almost like trying to scratch the United States' face by bringing yourself down to the knees.
Right. It's an important point because, again, people look at this, they say, oil, we need this oil, it's gonna be off the market, the Russians and the Chinese are gonna get it. And it's like there's very little candor or even, just honesty generally about how much leverage we have as the United States. We're the global superpower militarily, economically, to see the same guys that throw their weight around in the UN Security Council and just dictate how things have to go. And then suddenly, oh, what can we do?
Yeah.
MBS, he's there he goes again. We've got to just...
So nobody should be surprised, today, in 2015, yes, MBS was an unknown commodity, he was new to the scene, people were still, the verdict wasn't out. But for the Biden administration, they have now the benefit of hindsight. 7 years of witnessing blunder after blunder by MBS and also knowing what exactly works with him and what doesn't work.
Talk about the Trump administration, because that's such an important point. And how he was able to manage the relationship.
So there are multiple examples and precedents and facts to show that MBS only understands language of power. Appeasement, including fist bumps and presidential visit, would only embolden him and verify his delusional sense of superiority in this relationship.
And is shown to have done that.
Yeah,
in his
absolutely.
behavior.
But a bit of different context, but in April 2020, MBS basically raged an oil price war that hurt American shale gas producers, and you can recall the future contracts went even sub-zero. And what the sitting US president at that time did is he decided to act as the senior partner in this relationship and exercise US leverage. So he didn't need to take a plane to Jeddah and fist bump MBS. He picked up the phone and literally said, I'm not going to be able to stop Congress from going after you. And he threatened cutting, arms support. What did
he said they were going to pull the U.S. military out,
yes.
which nobody had said.
So it was simple. Listen, you're hurting the U.S. with your oil policy, exactly what's happening today.
Yeah.
I'm going to cut military support. And you know what happened? And I remember that because it was an official Saudi press release right after that call. And it says, Saudi Arabia, in response to the request of the U.S. president and our colleagues and our friends in Congress, we are calling for an OPEC Plus meeting. They did that, and OPEC Plus made the biggest swing in its production output in history. They cut production by 10 barrels and to help lift prices.
So we totally complied with what President Trump, I guess asked is maybe a light word, what he mandated that they do.
The reporting on that phone call was funny. It says that it was an ultimatum and MBS was so embarrassed that he had to kick out his advisors from the room because the sitting US president was tough and exercised his leverage.
And that's how you deal with a bully. And honestly, credit to President Trump for doing that. Not someone that I'm often giving credit to, but I think he had the idea right in the nature of how you're going to execute that relationship.
I'm not in the place of giving political endorsements, but when it comes to dealing with MBS, I think that's the way to go forward. The U.S., it's high time that the Biden administration start acting like the senior partner in this relationship, reasserts U.S. leverage, and basically make demands and ultimatums. It's, let me simplify it. The Biden administration should not allow itself to figuratively and literally be held over a Saudi oil barrel that is still dependent on U.S. protection. And by the way, U.S. security guarantees include guarantees of oil facilities. There's an example where in 2019, Iran attacked Abqaiq, which is one of the biggest refineries in the world.
Right.
And if you can't protect your oil facilities, you're not even going to have oil to ship and produce, and that would hurt your revenues.
Right.
What did they do? Second day, MBS's brother, who's now the Minister of Defense, flew to D.C. and asked for more Patriot batteries. And by the way, there's an interesting, story here. President Trump didn't care about human rights. There was no rhetoric. He didn't even pretend to care about human rights.
No pretense, yeah.
But with that request for more additional military support, he included the release of a U.S. citizen in Saudi Arabia, and he was released as part of that transaction.
Wow. So not only getting the oil production that you wanted, but getting a more favorable disposition with regards to human rights issues by flexing that muscle that we have. That, by the way, this is a unique situation in which this country depends on us for billions in weapons support to defend themselves against the Houthis and the Iranians and so on and so forth. That's the kind of leverage that means you don't have to go to war. We don't have to invade Iraq or invade Afghanistan to change our policy. You just need to withdraw what you're giving them.
Yeah, and it's pretty interesting because with MBS, he is simultaneously the perpetrator of egregious human rights violations and also the orchestrator of disastrous foreign policy that has hurt U.S. interests regionally and what we just saw with the OPEC Plus cut. So to expect him all of a sudden to mature on foreign policy but remain the authoritarian he is on egregious human rights violations, it's just like wishful naivete, to be honest. And that's why it's so intertwined. And you need to combine realism with defending values at the same time.
So this seems like a good place to close on. What's your sense of how the administration is going to respond to this and how rational it will be? Because we are seeing a fairly unprecedented response on the part of Congress, but my impression in the course of my reporting is that there's a split between the Congress and the White House. These oil production cuts having the effect that they do on economies, we're a fossil fuel economy that depends on it for all sorts of things. It's much more complicated than just the gas prices. I think that frontline members in Congress that are facing a re-election are very worried about it and have the sense that the White House doesn't have that same sense of urgency that they think is necessary. So how do you think the White House and the National Security Council are going to respond to all this?
Oh, I mean, so far, the way they've acted doesn't give me a lot of optimism. I'm afraid, there are promising consequences, but this is the same admin that during the campaign trail promised to keep Saudi Arabia, or MBS, a pariah, and then it ended up with a fist bump. So I'm just afraid that the kind of rage right now and the promises of consequences are gonna probably end up with a wrist slap instead of a fist bump. But it's fine for Congress and the admin to have different views, and maybe that is a dynamic that should be exploited. Create a good cop, bad cop scenario. Have Congress go at MBS and then pick up the phone and tell him, listen, I'm not gonna be able to veto anything that comes out of Congress. I'm not gonna be able to protect you from Congress unless you give me something to work with. And that would include concessions on foreign policy and oil policy, but also resolving human rights cases, starting with American citizens that up until 2 weeks ago are being tortured and sentenced to draconian sentences in court for tweeting tweets on U.S. soil.
Nonviolent tweet, just satire or whatever. So, and it can't be stressed enough. We have a proof of concept for how to get MBS to comply with these things in the form of what the Trump administration successfully did. So it's not like we're talking about this in the abstract.
No, there are facts, there are precedents. Just look at what works, that doesn't work. Appeasement doesn't work. It's time to change the policy. You need to bully MBS into concessions because that's the only language that bullies understand.
Good to talk to you, Khalid.
Likewise.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.